Hi, I'm Jacqueline. Thanks so much for joining me again today. We've been talking about the everything patterns, which are patterns which you can use for a lot of different creative applications, one of them being embroidery. So today we're going to be talking about some basics of embroidery. Now below this video you're going to find a couple of other videos. One is going to be how to do some basic embroidery stitches, and the other will be the basic supplies that you need to get started for hand embroidery. When I was shooting the original supplies video, at that time I didn't use interfacing behind my embroidery fabric. And I've recently started using the interfacing and I really like it. And in a few minutes I'll tell you why I like it. But I've used both woven and non-woven interfacings for my embroidery, and I find that they work equally well, so whichever you can find is fine. And I also always use fusible interfacing, and I'll show you how to fuse it also in a few minutes. Now we're also going to be talking about how to transfer your pattern to your fabric today. So let's get started. We will be using the Oh Honey embroidery pattern today. First I'm going to cut my fabric a little bit bigger than the embroidery pattern, and you want your fabric a good 1.5 to 2 inches, maybe even a little bit more bigger on each of the sides. You want the fabric bigger than the pattern. And then you want to cut your interfacing a little bit smaller than the fabric. So now I want to trace my design onto my fabric. And what I like to do is I like to tape my design to the fabric so it doesn't shift around. So I just put the pattern on the back of the fabric and I center it, and I just use plain transparent tape to just stick it down so it doesn't move around while I'm working. So this is the front of my fabric, and I turn on my light box. And you can see how that just kind of makes it easier to see the design. So now I'm going to use, right now I'm going to use a Pigma Micron pen. This is a fine marker, but it is permanent, so you have to be careful when you're tracing. And I'm just going to start tracing my pattern onto the fabric. Now, like I said, it's permanent, so you want to try not to slip, because if you slip, you're going to have to try to incorporate that line into your design or start over again, because you won't be able to get it out of the fabric. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to just trace the main parts of the pattern. If you can see that I have these little dotted lines here in the pattern, I'm not even going to bother to trace those. I'm just going to kind of freehand those in later on. The same thing with this bee body, where you can see it's dark here in this area. I'm not going to go and color all of that in. I'll just refer to my pattern later. Now, usually when I'm drawing a pattern, if there's a little circle or a dot, that means it's a French knot. And you don't have to draw that giant circle. I just put a little tiny dot for the French knot. And the same thing down here, if you can see these little dots, which will be French knots. I mean, I could draw that circle in, but it's just easier to just draw a little dot where the center of it's going to be. And then you don't have to worry about covering up that outline either of that big circle. Now, we can also use, for transferring the design, we can use a washout embroidery pen. And this, once you're done with your stitching, you can just use a little bit of water and dab out the excess lines. And if you want to use this, what's nice is if you make a mistake, you know, you can just blot that out later. And also for something like this, where I want to leave, you see, this is not a solid line. There's dashes there. And if I was using the permanent marker, I'd have to go and mark each of those little lines, because the blank parts would not be covered by thread. But if I'm using the washout marker in this area, I can just do the whole thing, and then any line or part of the line which is not covered with embroidery floss, I can just wash out or dab out later. So that's it. You just go and trace your pattern. And I like to have my hand here and kind of keep the fabric taut so it doesn't pull on me while I'm trying to trace. Now, if you don't have a light box, you can also just tape your design up in a sunny window. So now I've got my design traced onto my fabric. I want to fuse the interfacing onto the back of the fabric. So I want to flip the design over, and I want to put the interfacing with the fusible side facing the fabric. And you can tell which is the fusible side because it has like a texture or a bumpiness to it. And I get that centered, and then I just grab my iron and I just fuse that on. It only takes a couple of seconds. And the reason I like fusible is that this is not going to shift around when I'm trying to embroider. You can see it's liftable. So if I decide that I need to move it, or after I'm done my embroidery, if I want to remove the excess on the edges, I can remove it. And the reason I like using the interfacing on the back of my embroidery is that it gives the fabric a little bit more body when you're embroidering, and it also helps to hide the stitches that are on the back from showing through. Now, especially if you're using a dark colored embroidery floss, it can sometimes, the little tails of the threads can sometimes show through to the front if you're using a light colored fabric. So that's why I like that interfacing, to give an extra layer. Okay, so now I have my design all traced on there. It's time to put it in the embroidery hoop and start stitching. Now, as far as the size of the embroidery hoop, I like to use the biggest one that I can fit on the fabric so that I don't have to keep moving the hoop around a lot. And you can keep that in mind when you're cutting out your fabric. The bigger border you leave on your fabric, then the bigger embroidery hoop you can use. So to do the embroidery hoop, I just put the bottom on there. I snap that in. And I just tighten this. And I'm ready to go. Okay, so now I'm going to start my stitching, and I'm going to do a running stitch, which is really simple. You just bring the needle down and then you bring it back up again. And I'm just going to keep going. Now remember, I traced this as a solid line because it would be easier than doing all those little dots. And that's okay, because when I'm done, this, I don't know if you can see it there, the blue ink from the pen that's not being covered by thread, that is going to, I can just dab that away with water since this is a washout marker. If I was using the permanent marker like I had done here, I wouldn't be able to wash that out. So I'd have to do just these little dashes like I've done here. So that's it. It's very relaxing. It's very fun to do. I mean, I know a lot of people think that they don't have time to do any kind of hand sewing, but you can do this in the car. You can do this while you're waiting for dentist appointments, or if you have kids at soccer practice that you're waiting for. It's very relaxing. It's meditative. I do it at night a lot of times if I'm just sitting and watching TV. It's a great way to relax. Sometimes I want to sew something and I just don't feel like sitting down to my machine, and this is very, very relaxing. And I'm not doing a great job with my stitches here because it's kind of hard with the camera in the way, but you get the general idea. I hope you found that helpful. Next time I'll be doing another video showing you ways to use the everything patterns for coloring and painting and different projects you can do using them that way. Have a great day.